Hi again. So this one, the episode is like a continuum of the previous, providing a much needed upward thrust is data yet again. It's the currency we can't get away from, it's an all-pervasive continuum, and remains at the heart of most of today's contemporary discussion points. So here you have it. For today's pep talk, we'll continue to chat about data, but with a twist of Valentine's Day. With it fast on the approach, a brooding February the 14th, Valentine's Day is the perfect terrain for checking in with a look at love data. But love isn't just a one-day affair, it's a perennial challenge. Here's the challenge. Stay with this. Are you ready? So, let's say the data you inputted to the system, a dating website, has already crunched, pushed and pulled that data into shape to predict a compatibility score for you. It's done the same for 1 million other people. And then ping, you have been paired. Bingo. You have the perfect date. Achieved because according to the data, you and that other person have a similarly high compatibility rating. But here's the burner. You can't see their appearance. There is no profile picture. What do? One dating website, OK Cupid, pitched such a challenge to its users many years back, 7 years ago, and which became known in the media news cycle as the now infamous Love is Blind Day, distorted in the media with a headline, the OK Cupid Experiment. A little bit more scientific that way. The crucial idea behind the experiment being to measure how appearance, the physical attractiveness of someone, affects our perception of others. And it's not the internet that's at fault. The black mirrors we use, our phones, the screens we use to communicate via the internet simply act as gateways, visual gateways. If something is not to our taste, then we generally move on. But isn't it better to meet somebody anyway? You've been matched perfectly, and then if you meet, there will be a burst of instinct and chemistry that determines whether you like that person or not. But it seems our egos and our pathology kicks into action, forcing us to exercise an extreme level of caution. But caution to the wind, here's this episode's anecdote, discussing the perils and the upshot of dating. So the personals, the printed text in the personals section of a physical magazine or newspaper, in it people write extremely briefly about what they're seeking. In just a quick sentence or two you sum up your request. The emphasis was on brevity, being brief. Being brief equated to a cheaper costing ad. And given also there was no guarantee to anyone even responding to your ad, keeping the cost low was the main aim. You see, to get an ad printed, you had to run to a public call box, dial a premium rate number and place the ad, paying like £2 for the privilege. Mobile phone call plans were pretty expensive at that time in the mid-90s. That meant people using premium numbers meant double the cost. Also, the internet was a one-trick pony for emailing and Googling only. And the most trafficked social network websites at that time was geosites. This is 1995 I'm talking about, 25 years ago, when I was just a blossoming 22 years of age. To filter your request, you had to select a subcategory of where your ad would appear, basically your target group or the gender match sexual orientation. Either W for W, M for M, or W for M, or M for W, let's say. The subcategory I chose was M for M, men seeking men. The thing is, I just recently come out of the closet, as we say. After dating girls since puberty, even through university, I was, gay. I always felt it, always knew it, but was emotionally now ready to go the whole 9 yards, so I placed a small ad in total secrecy. These ads, it's worth mentioning, were anonymously listed, no names, just a number to call and a code number to request. 1 week later or so, I was feverishly checking the small ads. If you like the sound of somebody's profile, then you pay 50 pence sterling a minute, half a quid, a premium cost, to listen to the voice of the person who has left that ad. Already then in the public call box, I eagerly slotted the 50 pence coin and dialed the number. Bring, 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 a voice request. To proceed, please key in the 4-digit key code of the person's profile you would like to hear and press the hash key. At number 9453, the message begins. But geez, it was me. Yes, I'm such a narcissist. The only ad which attracted my attention was a description which reflected me perfectly. But not only reflected me, sadly it was me, my own personal ad. Oh, the painful comedic tragedy is to discover that your only compatible partner is yourself. Comedy, pain and tragedy aside, the obvious upshot to this anecdote is that dating is not for everyone, and not forgetting that I had just outed myself as being narcissist. Oh dear. And 2 glorious takeaways from this tragedy is maybe 1, a profile picture may have stopped me actually hitting on myself, and the second is more of a verbal Dorian Gray realization that we are looking, in fact, for a reflection of ourselves in others. Can seeing a person's profile photo, their profile pic, be a deal breaker? It's a cultural phenomenon that 2 people who feature with high data-driven compatibility ratings, filtered by an algorithm which has crunched over 3.2 billion words of description, ping, compatibility rating 98%, that they don't even make it to the first date. Yeah, there could be things like time constraints preventing these potential couples from ever meeting, and yeah, people be on these sites just to kill time. But there's a 98% compatibility score here. What about the missing 2%? Maybe that 2% is a sprinkle of magic dust that you can't experience if you don't meet that person in real. It's a sprinkle of DNA, somebody's appearance. And it's your appearance too. It translates to the size of your cheekbones. Yes, the size, orientation and angle of your cheekbones, your facial vocabulary, is going to either seal the deal, date on, or be the deal breaker, date cancelled. It's a little bit shallow, but that's vanity. It's a very visual terrain out there. On this note, what we are talking about here is how the shape of our cheekbones simply reveal our racial profile. And sadly, subconsciously, yes, for the most part, it is argued that people on dating sites go for an index metric called whiteness. The experiment reveals, this is the OK Cupid experiment, it revealed what such a skewed metric whiteness plays in selecting who gets hit on and who gets left by the wayside. So the love is blind day, no profile pictures, just text. Here's an extract from the book Dataclysm by the experiment's mastermind Christian Rudder, one of OK Cupid's co-founders. It sums up the what, whys and wherefores of the experiment. Here's the extract. On January the 15th, 2013, OK Cupid declared Love is Blind Day and removed everyone's profile photos from the site for a few hours. The idea was to do something different and to get a little attention for a new service we were launching at the same time. The programmers flipped the switch at 9 a.m. It was a bona fide pit of despair. The new service OK Cupid was trying to promote was a mobile app called Crazy Blind Date. With a couple of taps on the screen, it could pair you with a person and select a place nearby and a time in the future for the two of you to meet. The app provided an interface to let both parties confirm, but there was no way for anyone to directly communicate before the date. Even after 250,000 downloads, The app failed because, in the end, people insist on seeing what they're getting into. They needed a profile photo. Fiasco though it was, Love is Blind Day gave us a visceral example of what people do in the absence of information. In hiding pictures but exchanging nothing else, we created a real-time experiment to set against the usual activity by removing what everyone else looked like, such as the typical biases or racial and attractiveness skews. The pairs of matched people were giving out phone numbers and email addresses at a higher rate to people they'd never seen before. Interestingly, the 30,333 messages sent blindly got a rate of 40% higher than usual, and before a picture was turned back on, the pairs exchanged contact info 24% of the time. When you compare this against the control data, they should have lasted an equivalent of 5 or 6 messages longer, but with photos switched on, it petered off at around 4 messages. With that information to hand, in a candy-coated nutshell, a profile pic does dampen desire in people who otherwise have a perfectly matched score. This isn't restricted only to dating. What about employment and career opportunities too? There are grave consequences to this. Media pundits quickly seized on the buzz around the experiment to draw a parallel with Facebook's misuse of data and said OkCupid's decision to do this type of anthropological study with its 1 million active users, well, it was bordering on unethical. It weirded people out. But the experiment had been designed in part as a way to improve how people used the website, to understand the inherent and societal biases of its members, its users, its subscribers. And so if we are talking business ethics terms, the website remained totally ethical within the bounds of good business practice. On the one hand, they were simply manipulating data for the purpose of streamlining its business practice, to improve its functionality of service, but with a bigger aim in mind too. On the other hand, the site would provide invaluable insight and measure the impact of racial and attractiveness cues, profile pics, on people's decision-making biases. There was a lot of levity on the day the experiment hit the news cycle, and in the middle was OkCupid's co-founder Christian Rudder. Interview after interview, he articulately defended the website's decision to meddle with data, meddle with love, meddle with people's futures. He's on record as having said that by removing profile pics, commonly known as mugshots, we remove a layer of bias, we remove racial and attractiveness cues, basically removing the veil of whiteness. Peddled through profile pics and names, as I'll reveal later. If I asked you to delete your profile photo and collectively we all hit the delete key in synchronicity, then all our profiles would lack the visual triggers, the only remaining attractiveness metric to go on. A way to figure out a person would be in what they write. The about text, their likes, hobbies and their repulsions. And that's just what was fed into the OkCupid algorithm to reveal a match percentage between two people. Here's an extract from Dataclysm that helps identify. A match percentage is the site's term for compatibility. There is no visual component to a match percentage. The number between two people only reflects what you might call their inner selves. Everything about what they believe, need and want. Even what they think is funny, but nothing about what they look like. The largest racial groups on OkCupid in all equal measure are Asian, Black, Latino and white. And in the blind algorithm, race has less effect on the match percentage than does, say, religion, politics or education. In fact, to a computer, racial categories are neutral. Asian, Black, Latino, white could just as easily be astrological categories like Aries, Virgo, Capricorn. However, no matter how neutrally racial an algorithm may be, it is us as the users who bring our opinions and prejudices with us, and they come into major play. Reflecting on the idea of there being a magic formula, a love algorithm, the three co-founders were not at all convinced. Ultimately, love is about chemistry, but still pitching themselves as modern-day alchemists, the data engineers set to exploiting the data that had now become their valued property and needed to convert it into something more of a precious commodity. After all, they were in the business of love, not love itself, not love per se. However, later on, you'll see how, in fact, one of the online dating website co-founders, Christian Rudder, seems to be one of the kindest men with one of the biggest of hearts. And I only know this having eagerly read Rudder's analysis of his time at OK Cupid through the book aforementioned, Dataclysm. The title is yet another zeitgeisty word, evidently mashing data with cataclysm. And as usual, these buzzy words usually lurk around the Urban Dictionary. Dataclysm is defined literally as the intersection where data meets cataclysm. More poetically, though, it's an endless amount of data from which endless amounts of meaning can be extracted. And that's Rudder's skill as a mathematician who thinks in anthropological terms. So on to Rudder. Rudder then, being a mathematician, and there's no surprise there, isn't it the case that most of today's profiling sites stem from the minds of geeky math nerds? Rudder's, like many of these nerdy types though, are completely socialized creatures. In his book, the co-founder shows a sensitivity in the way he draws conclusions from datasets. If you were to date Rudder, and even though he probably identifies as straight and is married to a woman, I get the feeling he'd equally date a guy as much as a woman, without a bat of an eyelid. He totally seems open-minded. That's the vibe I'm getting from just the manner in which he presents and interprets data. Anyway, back to the thread. I had a skeptical and healthy motivation for reading the book to determine the motives for doing such an experiment. If you search Google for OK Cupid Experiment, Love is Blind Day, there's just superficial hits in the return results. There's very little analysis of Rudder and OK Cupid's deep motivations for running the experiments. And I wanted to figure out for myself if the website's co-founder Rudder was just another guy with a complete ego exploiting people's data for just another get-rich-quick scheme. But no, such crude use of this precious data was not part of his agenda, nowhere in sight. Since the experiment, he has ensured, at least through publication of the book, that much of the data and its interpretation are public, and which you can read about in Dataclysm. By contrast to OkCupid's open access policy and its willingness to share research findings, companies like Facebook and Google consistently obscure and muddy the water. They enshroud their data in mystical and slippery algorithms, so much so that it becomes impossible to draw any conclusions about demographics. Let's check some demographic biases of Google, for instance. Right now, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to tap the pause button and search for something in Google, just to see how much Google skews demographics to be on a personal, geographical, or possibly religious scale. As a repository for humanity's collective ID, our socio-psychological identity, the autocomplete from Google is plenty revealing. If you're not familiar with autocomplete, it's when you begin typing a phrase, for example, who is the ... appears, and with the ubiquity of Google, it offers you to finish your thought with the text from other popular searches. Tinker and peek at humanity in wonder. For instance, let's fish out some stereotypes using Google's autocomplete feature then. Rudder explains a little bit. Dataclysm's copy editor had a mess of a time pinning down the Google autocompletes for prompts like, why do women ... Google had given us each slightly different results. For instance, where's thongs was my third result, presumably because that's a typically male question. Hers was wear bras. It becomes humanities then, Google's inner dialogue, that men want to know why women wear thongs, but women want to know why other women wear bras. Google autocomplete ranges from the hurtful through to the ridiculous, revealing, as it does, parts of our collective selves, our collective prejudices. I invite you to pause the audio and go to Google and trigger the autocomplete by typing the following half statements: why women and why do men, and see the bursts of judgment that Google spews out. Play along. Pause and then type why women and screenshot the auto-completion options which it offers. Okay, so maybe you did play along. If not, my results were why women cheat, have periods, and wear high heels. Okay, so and pause to check the autocomplete on why do men. And again, screenshot the auto-completion options which pop up. If you did play along, great. Here's mine. So mine are why do men pull away, fall in love, and lie. So although OkCupid is definitely an advertising, revenue-driven website, for Rudder, the whole involvement with the site from day dot has been to break through the crystallizing stereotypes peddled and which get embedded as society's tropes by the likes of, let's say, the Google search engine. Christian Rudder was the perfect guy to master this experiment then. These days, post-OkCupid, Harvard-educated Rudder describes himself as an American entrepreneur, writer, and musician. When you read Dataclysm, you can see his love for humanity shine through. He's some kind of living cyber folk hero of the commercial variety, a rarity. But why big him up so much with this fancy rosette? Really, it is that OkCupid generated valuable anthropological data, and over more than a decade as a data-generating company, it managed to hoard and analyze responsibly the key word. Here's an anecdote from a younger college-aged Rudder in a one-line extract from Dataclysm, which sums up how his people's first view of the world got shaped early on. I was an exchange student in Japan. The name of my exchange program captured the timbre of the visit in 3 words: youth for understanding. A 90s pre-internet, its goal to see the country as much as it would see us. Rudder goes on to recount a story of dismay about having to take the podium during a school assembly there. I rose from the floor to the podium and said something dumb. The next person due up was the only blonde in our little troop of students, and as she stood, and I'll never forget it, there was an audible gasp. The person standing there was just a regular girl. A shudder went through the crowd as if Pamela Anderson were there in the flesh. Many people would have taken that shudder at face value, and for decades, phrenologists, racialists, and quacks have jumped through hoops to give that essential cultural response a biological and therefore immutable basis. Rudder's does really highlight the inherent racism in many things. So, quite in keeping with Rudder's formative educational experience as an exchange student, the OkCupid site reflects his morality and is programmed to localize similarities we share rather than emphasizing differences. Sounds a bit of an echo chamber maybe, but that's another story. The company's analysis of this data goes beyond the dating metaphor. Today, These datasets collected by OkCupid give an invaluable insight into how racism, sexism and bigotry pervades at a societal level. And if we can see it displayed as data, this is possibly an opportunity to move society to a better position, to eradicate it across many sectors, including, of course, in matching people, but also in employment, but more widely in reducing inequality. The data extracted from the experiments expose inherent bias against major parts of the population. Us. Rudder calls this the whiteness factor. What's your whiteness factor then? What are the indicators? The shape of your cheekbones, the tone of your voice, the density of your hair follicles, your postcode, the school you attended, your grade sheet, the people who you connect with on social media networking sites. How do we get around this data-driven whiteness bias? To expose the whiteness biases, Rudder posits 3 examples. It's as if there's a lottery, a cultural, employment and geographical lottery, but is your game card already voided before game on? Okay, let's emphasize this whiteness factor in 3 details. Okay, we have a culture detail, an employment detail, and a geographical detail. Okay, the first, culture. So acculturated whiteness in non-sighted, registered blind population. Sociologist Professor Osage K. Obasogie recently produced some ingenious research called Blind from Birth. Obasogie interviewed people blind from birth and found the same attitudes about race as in the sighted world. Obasogie asserts that blind people's attitudes on race reflect a lifetime of cultural absorption as opposed to any visual reality. Institutionalized employability whiteness. Are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? Which got a resounding yes from the nation's HR professionals. And then expatriate, geographical whiteness. It's not my main claim that white men are unusually good looking, nor am I claiming that the data proves black people aren't attractive. In fact, OkCupid's patterns change in places outside the United States. For example, in the UK, the site's black members get 98.9% of the messages white members do, and in Japan 97.8%, and in Canada 90%, many being Americans abroad. It seems whiteness is a good old-fashioned American problem, which an unresponsible manipulation of data simply exacerbates and then slips over into being reflected in our subconscious attitudes and actions. I urge you to challenge any of the whiteness factors you see floating about the internet and in person-to-person conversations. Whiteness, let's not forget, affects the poor working class white folk too. So it's less about skin colour, it is post-racial. Rather, it's about calling out the power structures and the status quo, but also saying no to passing casual isms, sexism, racism, classism, misogynism. Let these ideas slip through, and the faster we ingest and repeat them, calcifying and corroding egalitarian values. Let's keep whiteness in check and stop negative ideas spreading. That's your call to action. So please allow me this final digression on appearance, self-appearance. If maybe you upload a better looking person's picture, passing it off as your own, believe me, it's more common than you think, a little bit like catfishing, or you're posting one of a much younger self, you're probably going to get more dates. But why are people likely to do that? Maybe you've no intention of ever meeting, moving beyond the realm of the safety of the black mirror, your screen. To understand this dilemma, we have to then question the motives people join dating websites in the first place. And there is a two-pronged response to this. It's either that you are the type of person who seeks quick validation, enjoying a kind of foreplay of messaging, even a casual hookup, Or conversely, you're the type seeking a long-term commitment, and so keep dating until you find the one in a million. There's interesting insights on Rudder's data related to gay, lesbian and bisexual compatibility matching criteria too, and I've included this on the episode page over at UpYourEnglish.net. That's it. That's the end of this podcast episode. Thank you very much for listening again. I hope it interested you in discovering more about what good data science can achieve. Also, do leave a comment on YouTube if you listen there. Is the whiteness factor something you've encountered? If you've any comments. Otherwise, don't hesitate to write to me, let me in on your thoughts. As usual, I would like to remind you that if you like the podcast and you want to help me, you can leave an evaluation on iTunes if you listen to podcasts on iTunes, or on other platforms like Spotify. That way I can reach more and more listeners and help more and more people to up their English. Of course, there will be a new podcast episode soon, and during that I'll be profiling King Cruel, whose album is due late February 2020, and who I'm going to be catching play at Paris Olympia. And a final word from the 26-year-old King Cruel. When I realised I could write lyrics and let somebody that I knew listen to them, like I could write a song about this girl, I could play it to them, I just loved it because all the words would speak to them. I could see them slowly falling in love with me. Okay, thanks lovers, I'm out of here. Gotta check that Black Mirror. Big up, big love.